Good morning to everyone. It's great to see so many of you here on the Friday of the GYSS. I actually told my kids what I was doing this morning. They said, "You're not a scientist. What are you doing there?" Because I'm a law professor, but among other functions at NUS, I also hold the role of Senior Director of AI Governance at AI Singapore, where one of the things we're trying to do is encourage people to think seriously about risk, not in the sense of prohibiting research, but understanding in what circumstances we can and should trust AI, among other things, as well as understanding the human dynamic in terms of how humans will engage with AI. So I know some of you are doing AI research. Areas of application like autonomous vehicles would be very simple if it was just autonomous vehicles on the road. The challenge comes from interacting with humans. Now, for a group like this, it's not news to any of you that AI can be enormously helpful in scientific research. Just in the last panel, we were hearing about how something that used to take 3 months can now be done in 10 seconds in terms of analyzing certain chemical processes. In the last round of Nobel Prizes, physics went to research in machine learning, and chemistry, the prize for chemistry, went into research using machine learning, in particular using AI for protein folding. I thought I'd start off just by getting a sense of the room. How many of you, let's ask a simple question, how many of you have used artificial intelligence? Maybe put it the other way. How many of you have not used AI? Anyone going to claim they didn't? If you use an email system, you're probably using it whether you like it or not. How many of you are excited about the potential for AI in your field? How many of you are worried that it might harm the chances of you getting a job in your field? Okay. Slightly less number. How many of you are worried that one day AI will rise up and kill us all? Okay, this is an interesting phenomenon which we'll get into about the ethics of actually doing research into AI, which we'll talk about, as well as how to use AI. Because the ethical limits of AI are becoming more and more part of the public conversation. I think it's pretty well understood, particularly for a group like this, that there's the potential for hallucinations or confabulations, depending on how you want to term it, the idea that AI will make mistakes. And in my own area of law, that's led to some pretty good bad examples, including lawyers who would present to the court a list of cases that are made up. And if there's one area where someone's going to check your footnotes, it's law. And so to the legal profession, where I sometimes engage with, I would explain to them that they should think about AI the way you would think about a very smart intern with a drinking problem. So sometimes they'll do great work, but you can't tell when they're sober and when they're not. In many areas of research, some of you might have seen this has become a kind of social media game. There are various publications that made it through double-blind peer review, editorial processes, got published, and if you search on the big databases for terms like, certainly, here is the text you requested, or as a large language model, I cannot do X, Y, or Z, you will find publications where clearly people have not only used AI, they haven't even bothered to proofread the output. So there's huge potential and huge ethical issues here, and we have a wonderful panel to help us think through some of these issues. And I'll do a very brief introduction. I suspect you know many of them, but so I won't read the whole bio. I think that's in the program. Professor Shamir is a world-renowned cryptographer and Turing Award winner. If you've ever used the RSA public key crypto system, and spoiler, you have, you've used one of his inventions. And indeed, we had a great discussion last night where it might not come out today, but one of the key aspects that led to the insights of developing the RSA encryption protocol was not knowing that this was not how you did cryptography. And that idea that you can do sort of research without being blinded by or constrained by what people have done in the past is hopefully something that all of you take away from events like this. Professor Joan Rose is the Homer Nolan Chair in Water Research at Michigan State University and a winner of the Stockholm Water Prize. I suspect that most of you are familiar with water and its importance, but if you've drunk any water during your stay in Singapore, you have benefited from the work that she's done in both helping Singapore think through how to collect water, but also how to purify it through phenomena like new water. Professor Yael Kalai is Ellen Swallow Richards Professor at MIT and winner, among other things, of the ACM Prize in Computing. She also has a background in cryptography, and all this is starting to make me think I should probably use a password that is not password on my computer when I get back to the office. She's also done work on the theory of computation, and recent work has considered, among other things, zero-knowledge proof of the kind used in cryptocurrencies. I won't ask how many of you are investing in crypto at the moment. So what we thought we would do is structure our conversation around 3 broad areas and then open it up to really anything you're interested in. And the first area will look at input questions, how AI research is developing, the extent to which it's drawn on material that's out there in the world, and any concerns we might have about the kind of original sin of AI, particularly its large language model manifestation. Then we'll look at the kind of applications that it's being put towards and maybe the incentives that are driving research. Because one of the biggest transformations over the past decade is the move of what are now large language models and a lot of the applications of machine learning from research in publicly funded universities to private institutions, private corporations, in particular private corporations that have a profit motive, and B, are usually not subject to anything like the kind of institutional review board or ethics review panel protocols that would apply to university research. And then third, we'll look at these sort of larger questions of governance, how we should try to manage the risks of AI, make sure that we can get the benefits while minimizing or mitigating the downsides. So Adi, let me start with you on the input question. And as we were just talking about during the coffee break, advances in large language models like ChatGPT most famously, but there are many other models out there, including open source ones. These came in part with technological breakthroughs, like the turn to attention, different approaches, but it was also based on data and the vast amount of data that was fed into them. And this gives rise to 2 kinds of problems. One is the copyright question, whether this data is being used appropriately, and secondly, the representation problem, that it doesn't represent all of humanity. It can be biased for all these reasons. People often accuse AI of being biased. Actually, AI generally is just reflecting our own biases. So I suppose the opening question on the input, the original sin, if you like, as I'm framing it, of these models is, should we be concerned about this, and what, if anything, could we do about it?
So at the moment, the main limiting factor on developing better large language models seems to be the availability of training data. The more data you have, the better the system becomes. And if you think about it, there's something wrong with it, because kids learn how to speak very well, learn the language within the first few years of their life after listening to or being read stories with a very limited number of words. You can count how many words, and it's tiny, tiny fraction of all the words which are available on the internet. And yet they learn how to speak very well, most of them. And I think that at the moment we are using the wrong model. You know, the human brain needs only a few watts of power, and it is very small compared to the huge data centers. And it learns in a much faster way, being given way fewer examples. But we are stuck with the deep neural network paradigm, and deep neural networks require a huge amount of data in order to learn any concept, such as what is a cat, or what is a car, or what is an airplane. So having said that, data is extremely important. AI research is extremely important, in my opinion, and we can elaborate later about justification for that. And therefore, I would like to eliminate barriers as much as I can. And if the availability of data is a barrier, I would like to lower the bar and to allow large language models to have access to anything that, say, Google search has access to while scraping the internet. I think that it would be futile to try to stop it, because if some companies, especially in the West, are stopped, maybe companies in China will not be so strict in obeying such regulations, and they will have access to everything. In addition, we have very few cases in which, you know, a researcher who is trying to work on a particular topic is not allowed to use everything available on the internet today while composing an essay for a newspaper about a particular topic. So if a researcher is allowed to access everything that Google can reach, why shouldn't we allow the large language models to assimilate all this information, even if the content was put illegally on the internet due to piracy? It's a problem of the right holders to try to pursue it. It's probably going to be in vain, but it's not the role of the training of AI to try to put barriers and prevent large language models from accessing the internet.
So I suppose the problem there, though, is the political economy of a creative sector. Because I understand in law this would be called the tu quoque defense, that, well, someone else is doing it, so I may as well do it. If China's going to do it, why should we hold our own people back? But that's a pretty short-term view, because one of the concerns, and there's litigation about this, for example, the New York Times is suing OpenAI. Simplifying slightly, OpenAI has one New York Times subscription, vacuums up all that data, and can produce competing works that make it less likely that the New York Times will have subscribers in the future. That's the New York Times argument, at least. And so projecting forward, if the incentive that intellectual property, that copyright is intended to incentivize and reward human innovation, if it becomes pointless, if you write something but you won't be able to sell it because an AI system will vacuum it up and be able to spit out something comparable or even better, are you not concerned that that will reduce the incentive for people to do creative activities in the first place?
I am concerned, but let's look at what are the two things which we are trying to weigh against each other. On one hand is the ability of humanity to access as much information as possible and to be aided by AI. On the other hand is the livelihood of several editors and writers for the New York Times who might lose their livelihood due to the availability of programs that will replace them.
I'll come to you just in a second, but I'm talking more about the idea of having an arts sector, of having creators at all. But Yael.
No, I think your example is not quite, I mean, if OpenAI used private subscription, which is not public data, to train their models, it's different than using public data on the web. So you're not allowed to train your model on private data that somehow you manage to have access to. Of course, that should be legal. I don't think there's a question about that. The question was whether you should be able to train it on public data on the web. So that's a different, it's all.
Okay, so this is wonderful. I wasn't expecting an intellectual property lecture, but that's where we're going. But you have to divide up, there are sort of three baskets, and the two extremes are easy. Publicly available data, absolutely, no question. Things that are expired copyright, things that are open on the web, no question we can use that. The other extreme, I think we would agree, is pirated data that should not be on the internet. That's like the Books 3 data set is one big corpus. An issue there is once OpenAI and other providers got to a certain scale, that's when they hired lawyers and that's when they stopped talking about how they train their data. The fight really is the middle ground. The middle ground is copyright protected data that you can access through the internet, but it's not meant to be, you can go on the internet, you can read the New York Times, but you can't reprint the entire New York Times on your own website and say, this is my work. And so the question back to Adi's analogy, is it like someone reading the New York Times and then coming up with new answers, or is it someone cutting up the New York Times and then just rearranging the paragraphs and then saying, this is my own work?
So, you know, I came here with a strong desire to disagree with Adi. Adi was my advisor, my master thesis advisor, and I really wanted to disagree, but, you know, I'm having a hard time here. Hopefully he'll make it easier for me later. I think I agree with Adi, but I think what's important, I think what should shift is not, constricting the models, but rather ensuring that what is publicly available is only what should be publicly available. Actually, today, I think we're not even aware that we're putting so much of our private data out there. Many people are not even aware of it. And, you know, sometimes it kind of comes back to you like, oh my God, I didn't mean for it to be public. Well, everything we put on the web is public. And I think maybe it's time, as opposed to constricting the models, understanding that we should be extremely careful with what we put on the web, whether it's corporation, whether it's personal, and I think that should be the shift, not the constriction.
I had a question for both of you in this regard, though, and part of it was, if the models are becoming more sophisticated, isn't there a way to build in this idea that this is copyrighted into these models so that it's identifiable? And then my second question was, what about language? Are we biasing this development with the English language? What about other languages around the world? and the knowledge from, of other languages. So I kind of had these two like questions in my mind, and I thought, well, you've got some
So
experts.
maybe let's start with the first one about this sort of content and whether, I suppose a related issue is what happens when we run out of publicly available data. And some of you will be familiar with the problem of synthetic data being used and possibly of model collapse. So do you worry about that? Do you also worry about the scale question? We were talking earlier. My favorite statistic in the large language model area, of generative AI model, is that Amazon is one of the world's biggest publishers of books, mostly self-published books. And in 2023, they had to introduce a limit to the number of books you can publish. So many of you are working on lots of journal articles and so on. There is now a limit on Amazon, at least, how many books you can publish. And that limit is 3 every day. Because there were people producing hundreds and hundreds of books, a biography of every single person in the news, travel guides to every city on the planet. Do you worry about this sort of, the reduction in value of human creativity if AI is both vacuuming up everything and spitting out vast quantities that swamps human creativity so that we can't, that it becomes ever harder to determine what is useful, what is true, and what is going to make a difference in the world?
So before answering this question, I want to refer to your comment that why don't we just mark that this information is private or not? I wish it was so simple. It's just like you are talking about the drunk lawyer, junior lawyer. So the answer is you should smell him. And let's solve the hallucination problem of large language models by smelling their output. Things are not working so simply. And for example, there could be pirated contents, which is published in a website with no indication that it had been pirated. So there will be a website not called New York Times, but it is republishing those stories. So is it the responsibility of the large language model to look at text and search the internet? Where else did this text or similar text appear? And also, there are so many technical possibilities to hide the fact that you are basing your answer primarily on a particular topic. For example, you can take a story from the New York Times verbatim, translate it into Japanese, translate it back from Japanese to English, and it will not look exactly the same as the original story. So now it becomes a degree issue. Is it just roughly based on the story of New York Times or not? So things are very complicated.
So maybe let's turn to Joan's second question about the sort of the representation of the data set. And in this context, we've been doing at AI Singapore some roundtables outside of Singapore. And I had a very small role in the United Nations process looking at governance of AI. In countries like Singapore, the United States, Israel, I assume, a lot of the focus is on the worry about misuse of AI. But in many parts of the world, they worry more about missed uses of AI, not being involved. And it's easy to forget this, but there's something like 750 million people who do not have stable electricity. There's more than 2 billion people without stable access to the internet. There is the language representation problem that Joan's pointed to. We've done some research in Singapore using a large language model that, among other things, uses regional languages. And it's a kind of interesting side finding that Singlish, which is the kind of patois that is occasionally used in Singapore, of all the languages that it's hard to get the models to behave, Singlish apparently is one of the hardest. And those of you familiar with Singlish will know that you don't get serious academic papers or newspaper articles written in Singlish. Singlish, to the extent that it's used online, tends to be on Hardware Zone, Savvy Boy Cafe, these sort of online forums. So once you speak Singlish, the machine assumes that you want to talk trash. So that's a kind of trivial case. But do you worry about the sort of representation, to all three of you, in the kind of data that is representative? Because it tends to be coming in English from Western countries. There's a growing amount of Chinese data, of course. But do you worry about that representation of what it might do to the implicit bias in AI, which is, of course, not AI's bias, but a reflection of our own biases?
So actually, I want to say something about this. I think there's a misconception that AI increases bias. So, of course, the internet is full of bias because we are biased, humans are biased, and there is a somehow assumption that AI just increases it. So recently there's been a paper showing the exact opposite. Actually, AI reduces bias. And the reason AI reduces bias is the way they train the model is not just like take the data from the web and put it in a deep neural net. That's not how they do it. They involve humans in the loop with an effort to actually reduce bias, and as a result, what you see when you access these large language models is answers that are much less biased than you would get if you just kind of search the web. So actually, I think they're doing a good job in helping in that dimension. They may be able to do better, but I think they're doing better, and that you can see that not only with bias, but also with polarization or misinformation, where now we have a huge problem in the world of polarization, where people who tend to have one view, they just get this view reinforced over and over again, and as opposed to getting the other view, and this causes a big problem of polarization. And the large language model, that's again something that was shown in research, actually bridges. Because when you ask a large language model, like, what happens in the web, you use your kind of vocabulary that corresponds to a very certain specific kind of viewpoint, and you get back exactly what you're looking for. The large language models tend to give you a much more kind of biased view, unbiased view. So they give you kind of both perspectives, and it's been shown that it actually decreases polarization and misinformation.
And indeed, Mark Zuckerberg says that fake news is no longer a problem, so we don't need to worry about that either.
I'm not sure.
Which is, of course, not what you were saying. The other value of AI, just to come a little bit in your direction, is that if you interrogate an AI system and ask if it is reflecting bias, for the most part, it will try to tell you the truth, whereas virtually no human is going to tell you the truth. You say, are you sexist? Yeah. No, but then you look at the data and maybe someone is. Okay, maybe let's move on to the second topic, which is what we're using these machines for. And Joan, maybe I can start with you, because the ability to automate, the ability to develop autonomous systems has great benefits, but are there concerns? And I know one area you've thought about is wastewater surveillance, where you can sort of automate things during the COVID period, which may be, well, whether it's over or whether we've got to continue that kind of surveillance is an issue. Ongoing tests for drugs can be done sort of automatically. And in one sense, that's less intrusive because you're not going up and sort of sampling individuals, you're sampling everyone. But there are arguments that this is a different kind of surveillance that has its own chilling effect. What kind of ethical concerns does this give rise to?
Yeah, I mean, I think the use of this deep machine learning or machine learning in general is fairly new in the water profession. And they've been using artificial neural network systems for a while to look at treatment optimization, water quality, predictions, efficiency, those types of things. But now that it's advanced to these other aspects, especially wastewater-based epidemiology, this means that we've got new targets, chemicals, biomarkers that could look at diabetes, for example, lifestyle changes, illegal drugs, and legal drugs. And this has actually been going on already. I know in the Olympics, they monitor wastewater for illegal drugs in the athletics housing. Of course, they're not using AI yet to analyze all this.
I think they're also monitoring the Seine for fecal matter, which was a different issue in Paris.
Right. But. So once you get, all this information, and now we're getting more information about what we call the sewer shed. So the sewer shed is mapped out. You can pinpoint houses. You can pinpoint complexes, certain parts of your community. And so when you go from the wastewater into the sewer shed, and now you're looking at all these biomarkers and illegal drugs, and now we're talking about maybe policing, right? Or profiling. Or we're talking about personal data. In some cases, in Australia, they showed that they could pinpoint one infection in a population of 10,000, at least for SARS. For other targets, we don't know exactly the sensitivity, but we're going to get more resolution with the ability to have higher computational strategies. And with that higher resolution is, especially with health data, you've got privacy issues. And I know that this was a big, there's already been a big discussion on ethics just on illicit drugs, with the police asking for monitoring of communities, certain parts of your community, your poor community, to see if there was a meth lab, this type of things. It was policing. And public in general don't support that. They do support to a greater degree the idea of disease surveillance, where there could be public health intervention and help, but not if the cost is going to come back on them, or if there's going to be a mandate, like especially, a new mandate on, vaccination or these other controversial strategies. So that's what we're seeing kind of emerging in the wastewater-based epidemiology, is this ethics discussion, monitoring nursing homes. Do the residents have the right to have the data, right? So how do you present the data to the nursing home? Then what about their families? If you've got a norovirus, which is quite deadly in a nursing home, not in other places, they shut it down, you can't visit your loved one. How do we report that information, legitimately? And that's where this is going with both using the bioinformatics, the neural networks, and then ultimately the deep learning.
So I suppose, Adi and Yael, and also Joan, how do you think different communities should resolve these questions? Because I suspect it will be different in communities that are more individualistic, and the United States is maybe at one extreme, those more communitarian. There's also an element of NIMBYism, the not in my backyard, that if it only applies to other people, not me, that's fine.
Yes.
So the topic of our discussion is ethics in AI. I absolutely agree with you that there are big ethical issues here. Where I tend to disagree is that this is an AI problem, because this is an extremely well-defined problem. Do you find substance A or don't you find it? What are the concentrations which are detectable? I don't see a big role for AI in automating such a search. It's just a very particular list of chemical analysis that you have to go through. AI excels in ill-defined tasks, where you cannot describe the algorithm step by step, what should I do? So I think that while raising extremely interesting ethical issues, the AI plays very little role here.
Well, I think that what I've read is that with the ability to get and use machine learning or deep learning of the data set, we're getting higher resolution. And I don't think it's so much the concern of AI in and of itself or the computational power. It's the interpretation that this allows you to make and the resolution that it gives you. So I agree with you. It's not so much the discussion of AI or deep learning is bad. It's how it's going to now interpret the information at a resolution that then police, public health, individuals, communities are going to have to make some ethical decisions without very much guidance at this point. So the interpretation, the resolution of the information is coming before we have sort of this discussion about how we're going to handle and use that information for the betterment of our communities and society.
So I can give you another example of policing question, which actually happened in Israel, and it shows the dilemma in maybe in a way which is closer to AI. In Israel, police several years ago started using machine learning techniques in order to identify people who should be stopped when returning to Israel from abroad and to search them for illegal drugs.
Profiling.
Yes. There is no question that it was highly successful. The number of people who were caught carrying drugs through the airport went way up, hundreds of % higher. The civil rights society in Israel sued the government, saying that it should be illegal to use AI techniques in order to profile and pinpoint people who should be searched, because it's unexplainable, because it's not clear if whether it's using data which might be incorrect, etc. So This is an example where the judges eventually decided that due to the non-explainability, the use of AI should be prohibited. So the success rate in catching drugs went down. And in addition, what happened, this is related to the issue of bias, the policeman was looking at people, and I have no idea what kind of criteria the policeman was using. He was probably looking for people with longer hair and darker skin color, etc., instead of looking at issue whether that person was convicted on drug charges before, which made much more sense.
I think
So
it's
just-
that transparency, right?
Well, and just one footnote on this. I mean, this is one of the limitations of law in how it can regulate these things. As I said earlier, one nice thing about AI is it will try and tell you the truth. I think one of the issues in the Israeli case was that they could not show that the AI was not, it wasn't just the correctness, it was that they could not show that the AI was not using racial or other prohibited categories.
The result was racial profiling,
but-
and much less successful program, and everyone lost.
Except that the police would then test, or the immigration officials would testify they weren't using race as a category, they were using their instincts and so on.
It reminds
Because
me of
the human mind is a black box.
Yes.
It reminds me of the time when I was randomly selected for extra security whenever I crossed the US border after 9/11. So mysteriously, 10 times out of 10, I was randomly selected.
Likewise, this randomness is very suspicious. Yeah. I want to say something about these ethical concerns. While ethical concerns, we should be very concerned about ethical issues 100%, we should also, at the same time, think of what we get, the benefit. I see that a lot when the dialect that people have in the United States, which is where I live now, and the dialect that people have in Israel, which is my home country, where, for example, in the US, privacy is super important, surveillance is a terrible thing, and so on. And of course, everyone would agree that privacy is a very important thing and we don't want surveillance. There's no question about that. The question is, what is the price that we pay for it? And what is the privacy that we leak versus the price that we get? So for example, in Israel, people are so concerned about terrorism and safety that somehow the privacy became a little less priority. So people are like, you know what, I don't care, as long as you ensure the safety of our children, we're okay giving you, the police, the information you want. In the US, there's no way people will agree to give the police information. It's considered, completely not okay and unethical. So I guess my point is that the question is what you gain by being quote unquote unethical.
There's also a real challenge in studying this phenomenon. In the sort of data protection space, there's a rich literature that shows that when surveyed, people say they care about privacy, but if you monitor their behavior, they clearly do not.
Yes, that's...
Now, I think, though, the cost-benefit issue is where is the cost and where is the benefit? And when there's a benefit to, a certain proportion of the population and the cost falls on the rest of the population without some type of understanding of that and mitigation, then you have a problem. And what I did like about the ability of the advancements in AI was that in the future, being able to say, not only is this what it is, but why is it, and how did we get there? That provides some of the transparency that's going to be needed to use, I think, this power for benefit. And but it's not quite there, and certainly not in the water profession and not in wastewater surveillance yet. There's a black box. There's no transparency, and that was a big problem. But I think that it's getting there. It's going to get there. So what is it? How, why did we, why is it? And then how did we describe what it is?
Concerning transparency, the Israeli police told the court that they are unwilling to reveal exactly which method is being used and which databases are consulted, because this would reduce the effectiveness. You know, if the police will say that anyone who is a very close relative of a convicted drug smuggler has a higher chance of being detected, the smugglers will know whom not to use as drug smugglers. So just listing all the criteria which enter into the decision was considered to be a killer for the effectiveness of the program. So I think that it wasn't it's not that it was a big secret or that the police didn't know which databases were used while coming up to the conclusion that this guy should be stopped and searched. I also want to point out that the downside of pinpointing the wrong guy is minimal, because if someone is now stopped by the immigration people and his luggage goes through an X-ray and nothing is found there, within a minute he's free to go through the airport with no downside. So it's not like letting AI program decide who should be sent to jail for 10 years. It is whom to stop in order to have his luggage looked at.
Yeah, it's part of the decision, you know, it's part of the decision making, because it was the same thing with bioterrorists, and they were monitoring air quality, right, to see whether, you know, somebody had released a bioterrorist, you know, agent. And they did not want false positives because of the decision making. So the false positive, false negative rate, and whether you're going to be tolerant of that is dependent on the consequence. So this is why I think that we need to have the public discourse as we get more resolution, more interpretation of these complex data, and that can have ramifications on how we make decisions for the community. We have to have the open discourse about it.
So maybe let's look at a different question about the application, the other kinds of applications that AI can be used for, and in particular, what kind of research is going on. As I kind of touched on earlier, a lot of the fundamental research now moves to private corporations, and they have a profit motive that's different from the kind of hopefully more idealistic, aspirational activity that happens in universities. Do you worry that AI research will go more towards, I think it was Stephen Russell that sort of categorized these as met needs and unmet needs, that you can do some things with AI we could just never do ourselves, like the protein folding would have taken centuries, discovering new drugs. There are things that we can do with AI that we could never do ourselves. And then there's things you can just do more cheaply. You can replace the radiologists, you can replace the taxi drivers, you can replace call centers, and you can also use AI for surveillance to monetize attention. And a lot of the concern, I think, that comes out of this is a kind of paradox, that the surveillance you were talking about, when people say they're wary of their privacy, they usually mean about the government. But they're very happy for their phones to vacuum up all of their data, even though the purpose of the government presumably is to look after the population. The purpose of the companies is to make money. And so there's a bit of a paradox there that we're willing to give these corporations all this data, all this power, with virtually no oversight about how that's being used. So do you worry, focusing on scientific research going on within academia, what direction we're taking that?
I'm worried. Yes, the answer is yes, I'm worried. I'm worried, so let me touch upon several things you said. The first thing you said about jobs, that the AI will take over jobs. The AI not only will take over jobs, it has started to take over jobs. Whether the AI takes over jobs, it's not 100% clear if it's bad or not bad, because maybe it will create new jobs. I don't know, this is probably a really bad analogy, but you know, many years ago there were people who were like doing laundry by hand for money. Now we have washing machines. Are they bad? They don't have jobs anymore, but everybody's happy that we have washing machines. So, you know, having technology can be a great thing. It can be a bad thing. One thing that I'm really worried about is the pace, because, you know, typically in the past, this is too fast. In the past, changes have been slow, and humans are slow to think about things and to change things. And it seems like this change is happening way too fast, and we're way behind. And that can be a big problem, because what can happen is it will replace our jobs too fast, and we won't have time to create new jobs or to deal with this change. If at all, we can create new jobs. But the pace is a big concern. I don't see a way of really, the real problem is also that even if one company wants to take their time, they can't, because their competitors is releasing something. And even, maybe a company wants to take their time, because they're not sure of the consequences. Maybe they think their technology is not yet safe enough. But when their competitor releases something, they're like, you know what, I'll release it too. So the pace here is way too fast, and I'm concerned. Whether I think or know how to mitigate it, no, I don't know. And I'm not sure it should be, but you asked about if I'm concerned, I'm concerned.
Did you see that on the news this morning? They said something about that AI was going to take over 30% of some of the private sector jobs. I think that was on the news this morning.
Well, there's
in
a whole
the
bunch of
next 5
consultancy that make money out of saying how many jobs are going to be replaced, what percentage. Don't worry, most of you will have jobs.
Hey.
No, but seriously, I have this sort of odd title of educational innovation. One thing we worry about is a lot of undergraduate education is training people for jobs where they move words and numbers around on a screen all day. Those jobs are not going to be the same at least 10 years from now.
Yeah, so that's one concern. The other concern I have is what you said about what kind of research people are conducting and whether this research is ethical. For example, you can use AI for war, and that's very, very dangerous. And it's much more, you can use it in a way that people won't even know who's using it, how they're using it. I think it can be extremely dangerous. So am I worried about the pace, about how it can be used? I'm extremely worried.
So just one example that picks up two of the points you raised, facial recognition. So facial recognition technology, Google, Meta had it available and held back because they saw big ethical concerns. Then Clearview.ai came out and said, well, we'll do it, rolled it out. And now that we've got facial recognition, it's kind of useful to open my phone and for security, but it's also good for targeted killing. If you can program it into a drone to go and hunt people out, you can use it for all the kind of nefarious surveillance purposes. Adi, Joan, do you worry about the direction of AI research and what, if anything, could we do to encourage it to be more for the public good? And one sort of idea just to throw in is at the moment, one problem with the way AI is being deployed is that the costs and benefits are not transparent. The costs in particular. So every time you ask Gemini to generate some sort of cat image, it consumes a certain amount of power, the equivalent of, I think, pouring a glass and a half of water down the toilet. There's a cost that is not passed on to us at the moment. And it's likely that all of this will be paid for through advertising, which encourages monetizing attention, surveillance, screen time, and so on. One reason why I touched on the New York Times example is there is a different model, which is subscriptions. But subscriptions are notoriously hard to get people to pay for because they're so used to stuff being free, and that sort of pushes us in the direction of if you're not sort of if you're not producing a product that you can sell, then the product you're selling is the user. So what, if anything, could we do to encourage research going in, something that will, to use idealistic terms, benefit human flourishing as opposed to exploiting our worst base impulses?
I'm a big fan of AI research. I think we don't understand where things are leading, what will be the unintended consequences, and therefore trying to, for example, slow down the research so that we'll have more time to adjust. I think it's going to be futile.
I agree with you. I said I'm worried.
I didn't. Not to.
I know. I'm worried, but I don't think we should. I don't know what to do. I don't see something we can do about it that will not be futile.
But any new field in research, there's responsible use discussions. And I do think that the scientific field and the scientists, those of us here, we owe it to the world and to have those discussions. We should have what is a responsible use, like with human use. When we started using, humans were used in experiments, right? And we started recognizing that discussion of ethics, it came forward from the scientific community with policies, animal use in research, genetics. Somebody asked a question about synthetic biology techniques. I don't see this as any different. I think that it's going to be our responsibility as researchers, as we start using this new tool, to really start thinking about what is the responsible use, policies and approaches, transparency, fairness, equity, the ability to share information and knowledge and to acknowledge the dual use of technology. I don't feel like this is any different. And we should be encouraging the forums, especially for those that are, they're going to be computer science, they're going to be in the AI field. You all rose your hands. You know, I was surprised when you said, you asked the audience, like how many of you using AI or work in the AI arena? Probably 80% of you raised your hands. That's going to be your responsibility to go to forums and say what should be the policies? What's the responsible use of the new technology for good?
Yeah,
for good of humankind, right?
Yeah. So, and we've kind of been here before. We've had technologies that have ethical challenges. I think, Yael, you put your finger on one of the key challenges, which is it's all happening so quickly. But we have red lines, for example, on human cloning, for example. If you're developing nuclear materials, or if you're developing just fertilizers, you're using products that are dual use. They can be used to fertilize or they can be used to make bombs. You have licensing requirements, auditing requirements. None of that applies to the kind of research that's going on at the moment. If you were trying to do a study at a university where you had a natural language process that could act as a therapist interacting with users around the world, you would have oversight board reviews, you would have ethical practices. None of that's applying at the moment. It is possible to do these things, but partly for the fear of missing out or the fear of falling behind, we're not. But this brings me to the third topic, which is governance. So what should governments be doing? And I can say Singapore has spent a lot of time thinking about this. I'm involved in some of the discussions in a very small way, and the dilemma for smaller countries in particular, like Singapore, is there's a risk in under-regulating, in which case you expose people to risk, but there's also a danger in over-regulating if you drive innovation elsewhere, and we don't want to miss out on this. There's also the question of over-inclusion. I think one of the challenges that the EU is finding is the risk of over-inclusion, where they hurriedly had to add foundation models into the AI Act. So how do you see these sort of, and maybe Yael, I'll start with you. Governments around the world are really struggling with this, and I think one reason why there's so much discussion is they realized 20 years ago with the rise of social media. So Facebook was launched in 2004, iPhones in 2007. Early days, we didn't know what the risks were, and so we didn't regulate. There's this idea of the Collingridge dilemma that as time passes, the risks become clearer, but the costs of regulation go way up. So now we know some of the risks of social media, but it's very hard to put the toothpaste back in the tube or the genie back in the bottle. With generative AI in particular, I think there's a realization that there's a risk, but a kind of paralysis as to what to do. So, take us forward.
I think at this point, in my opinion, governments should not regulate. The reason why governments should not regulate is because we don't understand the risk. Don't completely understand the risks. What governments should do is, in my opinion, is put money in AI research so that we will understand the risks better. Currently we're all scared. We're not really sure what we're scared of. Some people are scared of the AI killing us all. Some people are scared that we won't have jobs. Should we be scared? Nobody knows, but we're scared because we don't know. I think, in my opinion, the best way to move forward is to invest a lot of money and research so we understand what we should be scared of. And then we can maybe regulate.
I'm actually not so worried about artificial intelligence. I'm much more worried about natural stupidity. I think that the real danger for humanity is by people doing all kinds of bad things. I think that governments should under-regulate. At the moment, regulations come in two flavors. One type of regulation is to try to stop people from using AI for certain things. I'll explain in a moment why I don't think it's effective, why it's wrong-headed. And other kind of regulations is intended almost solely in order to stop China from becoming an AI superpower. And I'm totally against it. I think it's counterproductive. I think it will fail. So talking about the first kind of regulation, you probably know that in Europe, they passed a law a few months ago, a very comprehensive regulatory environment in which they try to divide all AI applications into 4 broad classes, things which are free for all, things which are a little bit dangerous, etc. First of all, the boundaries are very unclear. There will be many new applications which will look benign at the beginning and turn out to be more dangerous later on. Everything is in flux. And trying to catch something so slippery and that develops so quickly and putting it into boxes and saying this is okay, this is not okay, will not work.
But on the other hand, policies and implementation of rules, even when we understand it, takes quite a long time. So, and I do think that the discussion has to start now. The information has to start now. The forums have to start now. And I agree with investment in this area. We should be investing if we want to understand it. But if we don't start now, in 10 years, we're going to say, we need a policy here, but we didn't have the data, we didn't have the investment, what we needed to make good policy.
I think there's an argument we should have started 6 years ago, but yeah.
Finally, I disagree with you, Adi. I've been waiting for this moment from the beginning of the panel. Okay, so I agree with you that I'm also more worried about natural stupidity. That I agree with you. But with AI, I'm more worried because the natural stupidity is now going to use AI to become even more stupid. So I still think, I'm still concerned.
Yeah, and I think one of the issues, I'll do another class. So how many of you have read any Isaac Asimov? This group, okay. So you're familiar with the 3 laws of robotics, I assume. And so Asimov, I think, really is a great science fiction writer. He's a terrible legislator. And what people forget, through most of the 20th century, that's all we really had in terms of regulating AI. This short story written in 1942 in which the laws didn't work. And the problem with Asimov and that idea of 3 laws, to your point about we need to think through this, it's quite easy. And there are literally hundreds of guides, frameworks, principles that have tried to come up with the 5, 6, 7 new laws of robotics, whatever. The question I would ask is, do you need them? Because the problem, and I think actually one strength of Singapore's approach, is we haven't focused on new laws. We're focused on how do you apply existing laws to these new use cases. Because you don't need a new law saying AI shouldn't be biased. You have anti-discrimination laws in most countries. And if you shouldn't be able to discriminate as a person or as a corporation, you shouldn't be able to use AI to do that. That's right. If product liability governs a lot of sophisticated industrial processes, if you can apply that to a lot of AI systems, that will solve the autonomous vehicle. If an autonomous vehicle crashes, who's to blame if there's no driver? Easy, the manufacturer. Not all these problems are challenging. Where it becomes really hard is where you start going down the path of things that get beyond human control, and that's where I think there should be a red line. You shouldn't be able to develop things that can get beyond human control, uncontainable, uncontrollable AI. But also, this is the transparency question. You don't need transparency about everything. I was talking with a medical researcher about the importance of transparency, and he said, well, so some of you might know more about this than I. We've been prescribing aspirin for a century. We don't know how it works. We don't know exactly why it works, but it works, and we'll continue doing that. And that's fine in some areas of life, but there are other cases, for example, my area in law, you can't send someone to prison because the model says you're to blame. And this is where, Adi, I'd push back on your example that it's okay to take someone aside for secondary screening just because the model says so. That's the start of the sort of social scoring that China has embraced, that many countries are at least expressing wariness about.
I want to mention that I'm old enough to have gone through a similar phase of attempts at governmental regulation during the early days of cryptography, because cryptography was prohibited basically for civilians to use. It was supposed to be one of the 2 born secret applications. One is nuclear weapons and one is cryptography. So everything was regulated to death. Did the government succeed in enforcing it? It was idiotic. Lawyers at MIT told me that if you read carefully the law about exporting cryptographic know-how, I was not allowed to read my own papers, the papers that I wrote, because this would be considered exporting cryptographic know-how. And then people started printing the formula for the RSA encryption on T-shirts and going through airports in order to show that you cannot stop the spread of know-how with government regulation. So eventually, after the government was claiming that law enforcement will be down the drains, that the FBI will go blind, all kinds of predictions, eventually, after about 10 or 15 years, they realized the futility of what they are trying to do. And in the last year of Clinton's administration, he said, let's scrap the whole thing. It's not working. It's counterproductive. It's ridiculous. And they accepted reality. I believe that any attempt at regulating AI will probably go through the same phases of trying to regulate, having good intentions, having good arguments, but then it will fail in practice. It will lead to the bad consequences and will be scrapped.
On that depressing note, although I think there will be an industry. I suppose one question with AI is whether it will go down the path of data protection. So data protection, the reason why companies care about data protection is only partly to avoid fines, but because many companies see there is a market advantage in respecting privacy. And there was actually a good example, I think Yahoo, when Yahoo was being sold, there was a massive data breach and its price dropped by several $100 million. So to me, one of the key questions is how you allocate costs. At the moment, I do think we're at a stage where there's not an appropriate cost transparency mechanism to establish responsibility for a lot of AI activities. So hallucinations, for example, or confabulations, are a feature rather than a bug. Unless you have them, then the AI systems are not useful. Some of you might be familiar with Anthropic, which produced the model Claude. That started off as a very responsible, very strong guardrails, very boring, not very useful tool. And subsequently, they've tried to tweak that. I think there will be a market for how reliable a system is, and there might eventually be a cost associated with that. The problem is, at the moment, we're just in this sort of free-for-all, as I think one of you said, where companies are just throwing products out as quickly as possible. And to me, one of the challenges is what we grasp onto to help us guide this technology. So one possibility would be law, but I think for the reasons we were touching on earlier, many countries are wary of over-regulating because Europe is a good, bad example. Europe, with its not just the AI Act, the GDPR, the Digital Services Act, Digital Markets Act, Meta delayed the release of Threads. I think Apple has slowed down some of the release of its technology. In a big jurisdiction like that, they can probably manage. If Singapore did that, the companies might just exit the country completely. So what do we fall back on? I mentioned Isaac Asimov. Sometimes we fall back on science fiction. Here again, there is a big sort of problem that a lot of people seem to misread science fiction. Just two quick examples. After this, I'm going to open up to questions. One is Elon Musk, who keeps saying that his favorite novels are The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, not realizing that he is literally the villain in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the corporate titan who blows up the solar system to make way for a highway to maximize profits. And at the other extreme, you've got Sam Altman, who at the release of, I think it was 01, and the voice that sounded suspiciously like Scarlett Johansson, who analogized it to Her, the movie with Joaquin Phoenix, clearly suggesting he only watched the first half of that movie, where it's like you've got this interesting AI system and not realizing that that's actually a dystopian future. So we kind of rely on all of you to help guide us through this. Normally at this moment, we're asking you to ask us questions. I'm kind of asking you a question. What do you think we should do? What do you think this environment will look like? But I will also ask you, if you have questions for the panel, very, very brief perspectives on your own take on what sort of ethical concerns you might have about AI, how we could resolve those concerns. There are a couple of microphones up there. I can't believe you agree with everything we've said. We don't agree entirely with each other. But we really do want to get your perspectives. Seeing there's a few people coming up, I might take two questions at a time and come back to the panel. So please, I'll start with you and then switch to the other side. Please.
Hi, I'm Shinzit. So I'm with University of Cambridge. Simon, I'm a big fan of your work in AI ethics. So my question is on the transparent AI. So yesterday morning, we learned from Prof. Shamir on how to recover a deep neural network. And in the very same afternoon, from Prof. Joseph Sifakis, we learned that explainable AI is a complete lost cause. So I just wanted to it got me thinking a few questions. So can we really explain complex AI? That's one thought that I had. And the second question is, if we know that explainable AI is a complete lost cause, should we even try and explain AI? To summarize, two questions that I'd like to ask the panelists. So what's your take on explainable AI, and where do you think we should go?
Okay, let's hold. Let's take a second question, and then we can come back that way. We'll get through more, please.
Good afternoon, morning, panelists. So my question is about should we standardize paper reviewing by using LLM tools? Because so here's the story that since ChatGPT has appeared, then it obviously increases the people's capability to produce papers. So that causes, especially in AI publication fields, that the reviewers will assign the revision task to undergraduate students or to some random other LLM to do the revision. So I would like to seek your opinion on should we just directly standardize by just developing specialized AI tools for reviewing papers in AI field, because that should be a more responsible way, because the undergraduate students or some random LLM is not able to fully understand what the paper says, but if we specially design them, maybe they could. Thank you.
The question about explainable AI, and then about publications where the AI might write the paper, review the paper, possibly read the paper, and we'll sit on the beach.
So I'll answer the first question. There is no contradiction at all about between the two talks. In my talk, I explained how you can find the numeric weights in the network. This is not explainability. I can give you the list of all the 70 billion parameters in a large language model, and you'll understand nothing about how it operates. Explainability is at the human level. Now, I don't believe that we are going to have explainability, because if I refer back to the model of the human brain, can a human explain his thought processes, how he reaches a particular conclusion? He might have some idea, but there are also emotional things which are hard to explain. If you ask a child how he distinguishes between cats and dogs, he will not be able to give you a very coherent answer. He will say, you know, the ears tend to fall down, but there are many counterexamples. So I don't think that either large language models or human beings can explain what they're doing.
Okay, so no, it's not that I disagree, but I wish we could. So, you know, I really want to understand. I think as a community, we should try to understand. Do I think we will fully understand? Maybe not. But currently, I feel like we understand so little about what's going on. We don't even in a very basic, forget about large language model, neural networks. Why do they work? These even small neural networks, why do they work? We have very, very little understanding. And I think a lot of research going on now, I think, and should continue and increase, is on trying to understand. Look, brain, you're right, it's very difficult to understand, but I don't think we made zero progress in understanding the brain. We understand a little more, and it's a very important problem to think about and to understand more of.
Yeah, I don't think any question in science should be considered a lost cause. So I think we should always try to achieve greater understanding, for sure. In regard to peer review in AI, I do think that it may be coming, but I think the journals themselves are going to have to start, in fact, they'll have to say whether they're using AI in any kind of peer review, so that those individuals submitting their papers know that and it'll be an experiment, I think. I think we will be using more computational approaches for peer review. And like you said in the beginning, it may actually improve things. I think that was your inference, that it might improve things in terms of the way we do it now. And you don't get a reviewer and they don't respond and they're 60 days late. And so, but I think we're going to have to be transparent about which journals are using key tools in peer review.
Yeah, I want to say human reviews are awful, really awful. Probably many machines can do it better than we do. You know, in cryptography, we usually don't do journals. It's not our main publication venue. Usually we We go to conferences. We publish a lot. The publication's very, very fast. We constantly review each other's papers. You know, I don't know, I get probably 60 papers a year to review. Do you think I read 60 papers? I wouldn't have time to do anything. So you skim and kind of, you know, and you guess. The fact is, that's kind of how things go. I think machines can do much, much better job. Now that we have this technology, we should definitely use it. Now, how do we use it in a good way? It's a good question. We should think about it. But I think that's definitely one thing that will help us a lot.
I think we've just identified reviewer 2. So just a footnote on explainability and one on publications. On explainability, I mean, from the legal side, you would break it down as what needs to be explained to whom, when, why. And the why question, why do we care about explainability, is important, because if it's, I mean, why did the large language model choose this word rather than the other word, then maybe that doesn't matter. But if it's why did a person not get a bank loan, then it's useful if you can say, well, it was because your salary wasn't this or that. So there are different ways of breaking it up. On the publications, I've got a semi-serious proposal for universities around the world that we should have a limit that every academic can publish 1 paper a year, maximum. And so that would really focus on quality rather than quantity, but I think that's probably a losing cause. Please, thank you. This side and then that side.
Before we continue, could I invite all participants to introduce your name and your institution before asking a question? Thank you so much.
Hi, so my name is Inigo. I come from TUM in Munich. And well, first of all, I fully agree, I can relate with your experience with the police. I have been stopped hundreds of times. And I would be very interested in seeing if an AI is more or less biased toward myself in this particular case. My question is more about the diversity of these kind of discussions and more in the ethics part. Most of the scientists don't have any education or formal education in philosophy and ethics. So what kind of authority do we have to talk about this and pretend to make the rules when there is actual people that has been like hundreds of years working on this in a more theoretical and more fundamental way? And it's very nice to have a lawyer to bring another perspective, but I would love to see an actual philosopher here, because most of us in this room don't have any kind of education.
Sure. And please, we'll take the second question, then come back to the panel.
Hi, I'm Diana. I'm a PhD student in bioinformatics at the University of Cambridge. So my question is about the use of AI as a reaction to create solutions to problems that we face. So, with things like climate change, I completely understand how it can be used or should be used to try to find solutions. But with things like things that require policing or like breaking the law or something like you were talking about, prevention of drug smuggling, I wonder whether you think that the use of AI to try to create better, more efficient ways to identify people who are breaking the law kind of moves the discussion away from trying to find the solutions at the socioeconomical root cause of this that might actually be more efficient long term to prevent these things from happening instead of perfecting algorithms that are better identifying the.
So I can start by answering your question about should we have a background in philosophy and ethics, etc., in order to decide such matters. I have a very simple suggestion. Since AI systems have made so much progress, let's ask them how we should regulate them. They're probably going to make good suggestions. Someone should really put the prompt into ChatGPT, how should AI be regulated? Let's see what they say.
So it's happened,
Yes.
and it generally says light touch regulation. There is actually a company that was offering ethics as a service, which suggests that the problem with philosophy, the reason we've been arguing about it over hundreds of years is we don't have enough data and we're too dumb. So let's just hand it over to AI, as opposed to, and this is why I'm pretty confident that law won't be completely overtaken, legal questions, ethical questions, there aren't answers. These are not pure optimizable things. Because if you did feed all the data in, depending on when you did that, you would reify a legal system that might have been at a point when slavery was allowed or when discrimination on all sorts of categories was allowed. So yeah, sort of just one last thing on the ethics is there was a wonderful exchange on Twitter, as it was then known. Now I think it's been renamed, Hell, that's right. On Twitter, a computer scientist was bristling at these philosophers and ethicists saying how AI should develop. And he said, why don't these philosophers should go and get a PhD in computer science before they start talking about how to regulate AI. To which the philosophers said, well, the PhDs in computer science should get a degree in philosophy before they start transforming the world and how we live.
But I want to say, to your point, I agree with you, but I think philosophers are thinking about this question, and not only thinking, they're thinking about this question together with computer scientists. So this is happening. Maybe not as fast as we would want, because, as I said, humans move slow, but there is now a lot of collaboration between law and CS, between philosophy and CS, and so there are these conversations happening.
Yeah, and I do think at least in environmental engineering, there's, anytime there's these discussions or we have, a Flint, Michigan episode, that kind of thing, that there's it reopens the issue of that there should be ethics training for environmental engineering curricula. So I think that we should start thinking about how do we bring these types of courses into these other disciplines, for sure.
And maybe just one point on Deanna's question, which also raises philosophical issues, which is like, to what extent are we just using AI as an optimization tool to quickly address problems that actually might have much more fundamental solutions? I think that's partly related to AI research. It's also a larger philosophical, sociocultural question, the extent to which we think about crime, for example, as a problem that's solved with prisons. And actually, there's a horrible thing that came after the US election. One of the big winners was private prisons, because the assumption that a lot of people are going to get deported and so they're going to be put in prison. And so that sort of idea that we've got a hammer and we're looking around for nails to whack goes beyond the AI literature. There's also a larger problem in policing. Any other comments on the sort of way in which AI might be used in these public policy questions?
Well, I think that thinking about that, there's those larger cultural and social goals. And if you think about, just like the Sustainable Development Goals, and you start thinking about well-being, economics, the haves and the have-nots, so just using it for policing or optimization without optimizing a water treatment plant when half the population in the country does not even have access to safe water, right? How do you go beyond that, right? How do you expand the power of gathering data and interpreting it? That's the part I'm thinking that we really want to think about, is if we can start a better interpretation of and get more data. It does move the political will. So I think there's some hopefulness there, that if we do have more specific information, we can move the political will towards these bigger societal goals with the use of these tools.
Okay, next two questions.
Thank you, Professor.
If you have to follow up, maybe if you have to follow up, maybe in the break afterwards. I do want to give these people a chance to ask one, please.
Thank you, Professor, for the insights. Those are very interesting and engaging. I'm Sajib. I study community health and health tech in the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. So my questions would be a little bit of more like communicating with the public regarding AI and their ethical rights, as we have like computer scientists and legal experts here. So I think that's a very good opportunity. Unfortunately, we are not comfortable as like communicating with the people about these stuffs than we communicating writing the papers. So as Dr. Yael mentioned, the government should like put more funding and the more focus on understanding the risk. My question would be, from our respective research field as a researcher and the advocates, how we can communicate better with the public about the AI and their ethical rights.
Okay, and we'll take another question there.
Hello, my name is Bahar. Well, when Yael was talking, I kind of picked up 2 points. One of them was that it's moving too fast for all of us to understand, and at the same time, she's worried about like what might happen. And then I was thinking, for example, global warming has been going on for about like a century. We are aware of it, and then everybody is constantly talking about like how worrisome it is, but it's been taking us like a century to actually start taking action to a very small degree. And if if we need that much of time to just start thinking, if this thing is moving this fast, even if we are worried a bit now, wouldn't it be very late very soon? And then what? Because like we are worried and we know something is bad probably gonna happen, and then we are basically, we don't have enough time based on previous experiences to react. So
Which is why I'm worried.
is it like a lost cause already?
So concerning the first question about communicating information about AI to the public, I think that if anything, this area had been communicated to the public very well, because everyone has a chance to experience it on its own. You know, you can talk to many large language models, ask questions, see what are the results, and get the impression of what is this about. There are many other technical areas where people are way less informed than in AI. In AI, I think that the public communication aspect is handled reasonably well.
So I want to answer, actually, without joking about your concern. There's one thing that's different, which is, while we knew that climate change is a problem, we only started addressing it once we realized it's a problem. So there's a difference between scientists telling us that there's a problem and between actually needing to run away from a certain area because it's not livable anymore. So experiencing the problem and understanding mentally that there's going to be a problem is very different, and humans tend to react very fast to the latter and very slow to the former. So I think with AI, my hope is that once there will be problems, as stupid as we are, we're going to try to address them very, very fast. But I think my guess is we'll start addressing them late, maybe too late, but at that point we'll move very, very fast.
So this is a collective action problem. And indeed, we're kind of guilty of it here with the idea that, well, if we hold back, if country X, China, somewhere else doesn't, then they will get ahead. But there are hopeful examples, and from the climate change debate, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is now seen as a model for something that might be adopted in the context of AI. There was a debate last year whether we need, over the last year and a half, whether we need a kind of International Atomic Energy Agency equivalent for AI. And I've argued for that in the past, and I was unsuccessful, partly because there isn't that kind of impetus. I mean, and the history of the IAEA shows that you would not have the regulation of nuclear materials and energy that we have today without Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And so where I landed is kind of, I suspect where you are, that if we don't create an agency or some kind of global mechanism to guard against larger risks of AI, and the AI safety networks, maybe that's part of it, and Singapore has an AC in that space. If we don't create it before the first true AI emergency, we'll need to do it very quickly if there's time to try and prevent the second.
But this is a wonderful example, climate change, of how early regulation, when we don't fully understand the situation, can be extremely harmful. Greenpeace was fighting tooth and nail against nuclear power. They tried to stop the use of nuclear power, and about 10 years ago, they completely reversed their position. Now they are all in favor of nuclear power. And this shows that their push for regulation on the nuclear industry was not the best advice.
Okay, we've got 12 minutes left, and I've lived in Singapore long enough to know that I do not want to stand between you and lunch. So we'll try and get through the remaining questions. We'll take, again, a pair and come back to the panel, please.
Hi, my name is Jake Nicholson. I'm from Texas A&M University in the US. My question is twofold, actually. So with publicly traded companies such as Palantir, there's a profit incentive to develop applications using AI in things such as warfare. And I was curious as to your thoughts of regulation for that, because those companies would argue things such as defense incentives for developing those applications, but is there sort of a runaway possibility with that? My other question is, with the possibility of sort of maybe a runaway AI Cold War between competing companies or countries with this, and the large energy input especially in further developments of AI. Do you foresee this significantly contributing to climate change, and are there ways to combat that? Thank you.
Second one, yes, but please.
Thank you so much. So I'm Joan from PhD student in chemical engineering from Osaka University. So since we are a researcher, a scientist, so we are encouraged to question things, right? Like what is happening around us or asking the things around us, right? So besides from concerning of, about AI taking over our job, so do you have any concern or any thought about the disruption of AI to scientists' mindset?
Okay, go ahead, Yael.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer your question first. I'm actually very excited to see how AI will help us do our research better. Already, since when the first LLM was out, I tried to use it, completely bogus. It was no use at all. Now the new LLMs, okay, they don't completely help me do my research, but they have it's somewhat helpful. And we're talking only, a couple years. I think I'm very excited to see kind of where we will be 10 years from now, for example. I can't even fathom, actually, how it will help us advance science. My guess is that our advance will be kind of exponential. So I do think, it's like we've already seen, right? We talked about this, that science that took us tens of years to do, now we can do in seconds using LLMs. So can you imagine where we will be 10 years from now? What we will know, what we will learn? So definitely, I think that's the one thing I'm super excited about.
I want to refer to the military applications. So there is one red line that people seem to accept at the moment, and this is that whenever somebody is supposed to be killed, there should be a human in the loop who authorizes it. This threshold had been passed long ago. If you think, for example, about landmines or marine mines, they have all kinds of sensors. They listen to the sound of the propellers and decide whether it's a fishing boat or an aircraft carrier and how big it is, and they feel the pressure waves, and they use all kinds of algorithms which can be called artificial intelligence in order to decide whether to explode or not. There is no human in the loop there. You can talk about cruise missiles. They are navigating and trying to find a particular window to enter. And when you try to shoot an airplane, sometimes you miss, and then you shoot an airliner instead. So there are many cases in which people had been killed by automated system with no human in the loop authorizing it. So we are long ago passed the threshold of this. I think it's unavoidable. You can try to regulate it as much as you want. The US government, the Russians, the Chinese, the Israelis, anyone in the world is going to develop AI-based systems for their military. I think that it's going to be totally futile to try to stop it.
So this is where it's my turn to disagree with Adi. And basically, we've had this part of this argument before. There is a difference between automatic and autonomous. And so a landmine is essentially a rules-based system, and that's different. The concern about autonomous weapons is the idea that you are delegating to an autonomous system the capacity to distinguish, I'm going to kill person A or person B. And some people will argue that you shouldn't give this to machines because it's so complex. Military necessity, the laws of war are so hard. Actually, I think that's a pretty terrible argument. Before I did while I was doing my PhD, I actually interned at the War Crimes Tribunal for Rwanda. People commit war crimes because they're racist, sexist, tired, fatigued, angry, whatever. So machines can be designed to avoid all of that, but I still think you shouldn't give this power to machines, even if they make better decisions, because a human should grapple with it, and most importantly, a human should be held responsible for it. So where I suspect, there's an argument about meaningful human control. The challenge will be, yes, I think you're right, these systems, well, in fact, they are being deployed. I think first Libya in 2020 and now in Ukraine, which poses the difficulty that if you're sympathetic to the cause, are you more relaxed about the laws? But you still need to be able to attribute that back to some human who's going to be responsible. And the difficulty is, will it be the commander who's deploying it in the field, and that would be the normal command responsibility, or is it the programmer back in his or her office, or is it the politician that authorized this in the first place? But unless you have some sort of chain of responsibility, the concern will be that you'll have an extension of what we have now, which is drone warfare that massively lowers the cost of war and therefore makes war more likely.
I agree with you that we should have a human responsible, but I disagree that the human should have necessarily the power to do things. Again, we're not that great, turns out. As we see around us, humans have not been proven to do so great to the world. So maybe having machines make these decisions is not a bad idea. However, I agree that we should be responsible for it still.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions. We'll take all three, and then we'll take the last comments from the panel, please. We'll start with you, and then 2, 3.
Okay, so hi, Lisa from Ukraine, working in University of Tampere, Finland. And I have concerns between good AI and evil AI. So we as a researchers train our data on a lot of data sets, and if AI able to detect new virus and some stuff or cyber attack, it come out sometimes with very good ways to create virus, to create new cyber attacks. And like I tried some for my research, and it's really, really works. So, and you know, I'm one researcher. Can you imagine what all the others people can do? Do you have any comments on this and where we going in terms of like evil AI?
So first question, who's in favor of evil AI?
My name is Paris Rule. I'm from Texas A&M University in the US, and I have a question about like the landscape of the data that's currently out there. Currently, I would say it's mostly human-based, but as we grow into this future with AI, a lot of the data is going to be generated by AI. So I'm just curious about how do we think about generating new language learning models or new AIs in the future with this new landscape of data that is mostly AI generated, and how do you like avoid an echo chamber of this data that's just recycled?
Okay, so the slop problem. Yeah, and please.
Hi, I am Mitradeep Das from Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, Mumbai, India. And I was wondering about the use of AI in scientific research. So nowadays, for example, you can ask ChatGPT to review papers for you, let's say you can ask AI to design scientific experiments for you, to analyze your data, to even to write a full paper. On the other hand, you can limit yourself to, let's say, grammatical corrections with AI. So where do we draw a line of using AI in scientific research?
Okay, so last responses, comments, and concluding thoughts.
I draw no lines about using large language models in scientific research. The more, the better.
I agree with you. I think AI will really help us do great research. So I think it's a good thing. About your concern about AI in warfare, or, you know, it's a huge concern for doing bad. It's a huge concern. That's something that I'm really scared about. As I said, you know, the attacks like these cyber attacks that can be done using AI are extremely scary, because you may even not know who's doing the attack for you, or what is the attack, or if there's an attack. So I'm very concerned. I don't know what to do about it. Maybe Adi can help.
I want to mention that the smarter the weapon, the fewer innocent bystanders get killed by it. You know, in Second World War, whole cities were indiscriminately bombed, and there were lots of innocent lives lost.
No, but Adi, what if...
One second. If you are shooting a smart missile at a particular window, and you are using a small amount of explosive because you are not intending to bring down the whole building, I am not sure that it's a step backwards. I think that it saves lives. You are killing only particular persons rather than indiscriminately.
But no, wait. If you're the good person, you're right. But what if you're the bad person, or your intention is to kill civilians? That's the concern.
And also the problem that you lower the threshold, because at the moment, one restraint of warfare is domestic controls. Another is international reputation. But if it becomes ever easier, I think, Yael, as you were touching on, to do things without attribution, and sort of autonomous drone attacks is the most obvious thing. There have been a few examples of that already. The temptation to launch attacks, a bit like cyber attacks, where there's minimal chance of blowback, that will make it much more likely. You're right, there's more precision, but there's also going to be much more, a lowering of the threshold when you go to use force in the first place.
I think my final comments on, and some of these three questions are somewhat related to a certain extent. You know, when I thought about when you talked about climate change, and I thought about when they started that, they called it global warming, and that was a mistake early on in the communication and the study of the science, its implications, what we need to do about it. Now, I'm wondering, too, if it was a mistake to call this powerful computing power and methods and algorithms that we have AI. Was that a mistake? Is it hard to explain? And I would say for all of these questions, we should go back. You all are using these computational powers, and I think they're going to have a great benefit in science. But I think we should discuss, as with any new approach, and maybe it's more difficult because of the rapid nature of this field, responsible use, transparency, justice, fairness, responsibility, accountability, privacy, and non-maleficence, right? Because these are, that is responsibility of the scientific community when we start to use new technology. And we will have to communicate what we're doing and our science to the public, to the policymakers, and decision makers ultimately. So those are my final comments.
Well, before the panel, we thought, gee, an hour and a half's a long time. Do you think we'll have enough to talk about? Then decided it's unlikely we'd solve all of the problems of AI ethics. My sort of last thought is that in addition to the importance of communicating these things, having these discussions openly in person, I think really makes a difference. There's a reason why when we organized the panel, there was a reminder, this is in person, no Zoom, no sort of remote involvement. The reason why you're all here is partly, hopefully to hear us, to learn something, but also to engage. And so I'm going to finish on time because I want to make sure we have lunch, but also a chance to continue this conversation. We didn't solve all the problems, but hopefully we've helped you maybe clarify your own thoughts. I've at least found it extremely interesting. So before we break, please do join me in thanking Yael, Joan, and Adi for a wonderful discussion.